Guys, thank you. Today's webinar is about streamlining approval workflows and how that streamlining can also help centralize governance. In terms of the content, what we'd like to do is spend about between 45 minutes to an hour with you. And again, depending on whether it's 45 minutes or an hour, depends on the amount of feedback we have with each other in terms of what are we all talking about here. So first of all, what we'd like to do is talk about approvals and how it can help in terms of the businesses in the future. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about a little bit about an introduction of who we are in terms of Cordis, who TechWire Hybrid is. Joe is an accomplished analyst in this space, and he'll tell us and take us through some of his findings in terms of what the new age business model is. And we'll go into Joe's bio in a little while. Then we'll have a little bit a demonstration of the application which is one of the applications which is out there in the market, which is looking to meet this requirement that we've created for ourselves because technology allows it to happen. That will again take us on to a live demonstration, and after that Joe and I will wrap up, and thereafter will be questions and answers. So next slide please. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a small handover to Joe to give a personal introduction for himself, and then we'll talk a little bit later on about who TechWire are. So as I said before, Joe is an analyst. Again, he's had some very good rave reviews. TechWire, briefly, before Joe goes in, is almost like a Forrester Gartner type organization where they are looking at thought leadership, what's happening in the business, what's happening out there in the market, what the requirements are, and then independently making comments on this. And as I say, on this note, Joe, you want to take us a little bit about your background, your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thank you very much, Ramesh. First of all, hello everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I think Ramesh really has covered what TechWire does. I suppose our byline, in a rather glib way, would be something along the lines of where business and technology intersect, in that we are a technology platform, but we don't do things like gadget reviews and phone reviews and look at the latest amusing robot that comes out of Japan, fascinating though that kind of thing is. Rather, we tend to look at how small to medium businesses and entrepreneurs and startups can use technology in particular to improve their prospects, I guess. I've been with the company now for a year or two. A bit about me and my background. I started out programming, I guess, at a very basic level some 30 years ago or so. I guess I've worked professionally in technology since the turn of the millennium. I worked in IT management, and I've worked for web development companies and led development teams and that kind of thing. And I've always throughout that time written as a freelancer and as a commentator on the tech business. The knowledge I have is very much business oriented, and any specialism or specialization, I guess, would be in databases, process management in business, and I guess generally really in the ways that technology improves both commerce and the world in general, I guess. So that's a little about me. Yes, I hope that's enough. Ramesh, over to you again.
Thank you very much, Joe. So in terms of me, again, I'll make it simple. Probably a short summary is I'm a management accountant who lost direction and ended up in management consultancy. What we've tried to do over the past 2 years is obviously build application solutions to help organizations get more return from their investment in either Microsoft, web, and SAP. So I get my buzz out of making things happen and then improving processes, improving control, compliance, and making work more fun to do. One of the things which, again, Joe and I will talk about later on is how the world's changed in terms of the mobile culture. People want to work everywhere, and how technology and how we can use it right now with what we're talking about in terms of myApprovals and the approval technology, how we can embrace it to make that happen. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about the company Cordis. In terms of, I say, going to the key areas which we want to tackle during this presentation, the areas we want to focus on are business issues of training, People make mistakes because they're not adequately trained. Procedure and clarity. If I have to go to a number of different portals to follow rules, I make mistakes because I'm not quite sure where things are. Likewise, if I don't know where they are, it's more likely I'm going to forget my access and my passwords to those things. So those three are the top three reasons why Ashridge actually stated in terms of core common root causes of business problems. The fourth one, technology can't help with. If we employ the wrong people, we employ the wrong people. But the fifth one, again, in terms of communication, is something which, again, we can embrace technology to help us alleviate. So again, that's something which Joe and I will be covering in our little discussion later on. So that briefly is, in a nutshell, what Cordis is all about. Again, as a key focus on return on investments and making things better. I think, Joe, do you want to add anything more to TechWire in terms of, as a company, as a forum which is helping technology and usage in a better way?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that TechWire does is we're a collection of technologists who together really form quite a serious bank of experience in technology. And one of the things we try and do is there's a certain amount of didacticism to our writing and our presentation of media, in that, without hopefully being patronizing anyway, we're trying to help people not to make some of the mistakes that we've seen made in our working lives in technology. And I'll touch on some of those, at least that I've seen, later on. But it's our work with Cordis really that's in this case sparked our interest, in that some of the pitfalls that enterprise and business do fall into with regards to technology are just some of those things that Cordis can help out with.
On that note, let's start the presentation into the open discussion, Joe. And in terms of what sort of experience and findings that you're finding that people are asking for in this space, because we've got a bunch of people on board, and some of them have asked for understanding what technology is out there to help us with handhelds in terms of devices and consuming technology on devices.
This is a huge thing, of course, and most people in technology have bandied about the phrase BYOD, bring your own device. I first started seeing this in the early 2000s. Obviously, the iPhone was the big arrival on the scene. Interestingly, actually, just as a little geeky aside, the iPhone used internally stolen technology from the iPad development people at Apple, in that the iPad was much further forward than the iPhone internally at Apple. And then, of course, the iPad came out second. One of the things we found at various companies I've worked for in the past is that people would turn up, really, for want of a better word, at work with this thing that they'd been given, an iPad or perhaps an Android tablet or a phone, and say, well, look, this thing's great. We call it a phone. It's not really a phone. It's actually a portable computer, and I'm walking around here in my pocket with this device that's incredibly powerful. All right, it makes calls, but really it's a computer. And how can I use this at work? It's great. It's easy to use. It's obviously clearly powerful. How can I utilize this in my workplace to make my life easier, really? And this was probably about 2003 and onwards, and then to about 2010 when iPads and the like became completely ubiquitous. What then happened, of course, at least in my experience at that stage with a software development company, was that people were using technology on their desktops and on their laptops that was really quite different from the user experience they were having on their tablets. So, for instance, people were used to tapping and swiping and maybe tapping and holding in order to bring up a contextual menu, that kind of thing. And they kind of had this interaction vocabulary, if you like, with their technology. And they couldn't use that interaction vocabulary with the technology that they had on their desktops. I mean, a lot of it was sort of, some people were still using DOS-based tech. Some people were using text-based computer programs. I mean, to this day, of course, if you're involved in technology for banks, you're probably an expert in a language called COBOL, which was actually written back in the 1980s. So in short, there was this disparity between the way that people wanted to use technology, which they did at home, out on the sofa with their Android tablet or their iPad, and the way that they use technology at work. And so this was the first big dichotomy, I think, that modern tech came up against. And it's summed up really with the acronyms UX, I suppose, or UI, user experience, or user interfaces.
Joe, on that note, I mean, when we talk about, say, approval systems, how important is user experience and user interface? And what, in your opinion, when you go look at the market and look at these technologies, what are people asking for in terms of approval technologies? And when they are delivered, what sort of benefits are they giving?
Well, it's a very interesting one, because approvals are something that can be done very quickly and very easily, and it can be either a box ticking exercise, or it can actually involve quite a lot of research and background. So it's an odd situation in that people want to be able to interact very quickly with their technology, but actually what they're being asked to pass opinion on, if you like, can be quite complex. And so therefore one might think, oh yeah, great, we can just approve or disapprove or comment very quickly on our mobile phones, for instance. But actually, to drill down into a job or a project or a request, you actually need a great deal of processing power and the harnessing of a great deal of information in order to do that efficiently.
And in terms of, as I said, we talked about one of the questions. One of the questions that's come up, and again, we're probably answering questions as we're going along, is to understand how the whole approval process can be improved. Well, what, in your opinion, what are you seeing that people are asking for from the traditional way of exactly what you said before? It's a tick box. What you mentioned, people are now asking for more information before they make the approvals. So is the approval system shifting from an approval to more like a decision support system?
Yeah, I think that's quite a good analogy, actually. I remember I worked with a healthcare provider down here in the southwest of the UK, and people were, or rather nursing staff actually in this particular instance, were asked to pass on their decisions and document those decisions. And so therefore, whereas they could, for instance, on a phone or on an iPad, or indeed on a piece of paper or on a clipboard, they'd be asked to, sign off a drug's dosage or sign off a treatment. But actually, while that sounded very simple, they actually then had to go on and document the reasons for those decisions and the reasons for those particular dosages in each particular case. And so therefore, a decision-making or decision-approving process can actually be really quite complex. And in the case of this particular instance, and I can only really talk, about those particular situations with which I'm acquainted. In those particular cases, the actual amount of data required at hand was quite significant for the healthcare professional, and they would need to wade through that information and also provide a great deal of information as well in order to sign off decisions. And so really something that you might think to be quite simple got fairly complex fairly quickly. Okay.
Joe, do you want to give us any more of your thoughts, or shall we move on?
Yeah, absolutely. Carry on, Ramesh, and I'll just chip in as I see fit.
Perfect. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so what we're going to do now is quickly give you a small positioning of some of the art of the possible of what approval systems can and should be capable of doing. So we're going to look at one which we put together called myApproval. I'm going to show you and do a live demonstration of this system using a web browser and using Outlook, and how it can be scalable and usable on both environments. And again, it's also a 365 version as well, but I'm not going to have probably time to go through all of those things. So here I'm just going to, as I said, the key thing here is to address some of the points that Joe made. People want more than just a tick in the box. They want to see information before they make the decision that they're going to approve or reject something. People also want to be able to consume and make these decisions wherever they want. So they want to be able to make it in the airport lounge, because the world has changed. The world has changed where people now want to make decisions wherever they want to choose to open up their smartphones, their iPads, or their laptops. And with Wi-Fi technology available almost everywhere, people are choosing to work almost everywhere. And as a result, let's address that point and let's embrace it and say, look, are there tools out there that allows me to work anywhere, whenever I feel like it? And that's what we're going to look at with myApproval. The other thing I want to touch briefly on is look at the workflow task. If we are going to make things easy for people, are we creating a risk? We want to make it easy, but we also want to make sure there's an element of control and compliance, that the right people have been given the right information to make that decision. So therefore, we'll look at some of the workflow and the audit trail behind each workflow. And thus you can see that it is 100% auditable. And again, it's not just about making things easy, i.e. the user experience has to be really cool and funky, but it's also about making sure that there's a full visibility of audit trail in terms of what's actually happened and governance is complied with. Okay, so they're the key sort of items which I want you to note when we go through and look at this demonstration. So on that note, I'm now Juliana's gonna hand over the control over to myself, and I'm now gonna show you my screen. So what I'm gonna do is first of all, we're gonna show you the web application. So with the web application, what I've done over here is I've kicked the web application off already. And here you can see it's like a Fiori tile. And Fiori, as people who are SAP familiar, is written in SAP UI5, and it's totally scalable. So people use this to be able to shrink things down, and you can see the tile boxes move around, and exactly I can then consume it either on a phone or a tablet, and I can basically play around with it. So that's one of the usefulness of writing something in HTML5, which allows me to become totally adaptive to whatever device I'm using. In particular, I'm now going to go look at the myApproval application. When I click on that application, it gives me a list of items which I can choose to approve. So in this situation, if I was a user, so I've logged in as a user called Mark. Mark has got requisitions from Ariba. He's got a park document from finance. He's got someone creating a material master data who also wants to approve something. So you can see there's a bunch of different things that's in Mark's inbox. And the reason why we chose this approach to doing things and creating a centralized consolidator to do approvals is traditionally every one of those applications that you see on the screen where it says Ariba, FIDoc, Vim, invoice quantity blocks, which is a standard SAP block, had mechanisms to do their own approval. But then I'd have to log in to the portal for Ariba, to the portal for master data, to the portal for SAP Vim. Yeah, and I'll be logging on to different portals for different approvals, whether it's the requisitions, whether it was time, here again, if it was expenses, I'll be logging on to another portal for expenses. So myApproval actually allows you to consolidate all types of things, whether they're on SAP or they're not on SAP. It doesn't matter, because the layer is a consolidator. It sits on an SAP Gateway platform, and the SAP Gateway acts as a consolidator and then gives it to the user in a nice, simple way. Now, this elegant approach in terms of having all these different types of approval in a web front end is really cool. And I'm going to come back to this in a while, but in the meantime, what I want you to note is we've got 25 tasks which are open over here. We're going to do a live demo. I'm going to increase that number to 26. Then we can see how things progress.
Ramesh, can I just stick my oar in here just momentarily? One thing you did touch on there, which is quite interesting, is that you were talking about logging into disparate systems. Now, obviously, if you're connecting to 2 or 3 different systems, especially when you're on the go, 10, 15 years ago, you would have been juggling multiple VPNs. Now, even the phrase VPN to a non-technical user can spell horror. If you're asking frontline staff to log into 3 or 4 VPNs in order to connect to 3 or 4 disparate systems, then you're looking at, for want of a better phrase, help desk hell. So actually, to be able to agglomerate them like this is very powerful.
Thank you for that. What will again, one of the things I said, I mean, I did talk about scale bit. So we said this is the UI5 frontend, which is again ideal for mobile devices. But remember, our laptops have now become such powerful beasts that they too are very mobile, and hence the word laptops. And some of them are even thin little things like, say, the Microsoft Surface. They're like a tablet, which is also a laptop. Yeah. Now, on those sort of devices, people may want a more of a desktop type of experience. And again, this is about what Joe touched on before: user experience and user interface. Joe, Ramesh, Juliana, we all have different preferences in terms of user interfaces. Supposing there's a user out there who says, you know what, I like to do everything in Outlook. So then what we said is, okay, fine, if that's the case, we can have all those items which are open that you need to approve happening in Outlook. So right now here you can see in a live environment, it's pulling in, polling all the systems, saying, look, give me all the items which I need to approve on Mark. And here, the beauty about this system in this manner is I've now got an offline copy which I can walk around with, because we know Outlook is online and offline. So I can go into any one of those items, like say this one over here, and I can double click on it, and I can see the lines in that item. I can see the attachments the person's given to justify that they want me to approve the journal. So going back to what Joe talked about before, it's not just simply yes, no. I've got, as you can see over here, approve, reject, forward, reserve, or suspend. I'm now giving the users a proper decision-making platform on a tool called Outlook, which they're very familiar with. The same thing in the web application. And you can see that's the real power and the doors that technologies open for us. We can actually have now an opportunity to make our users' life easy. So if I close this and I go back and do a quick live demo, just to prove a point that this is actually working, let's do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to this, some more functionality later on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a simple brand new document that somebody needs to approve. And we're going to then do some attachments and we're going to see it. So coming back to here, I said, please remember there's 25 tasks which are outstanding. So what we're going to do is I'm going to log in into this sheet over here, which I have, and I'm going to log in as Edward. Edward's manager is Mark. So in this situation, when I submit this, it's going to go into a system and create a finance document, which is going to be waiting for approval. Now, before I do the waiting for approval, I'm also going to attach some attachments so my manager can see that all these travel costs, which I want to move from one cost center to another, they are justified, and I'm giving him some receipts as well. So if I could ask you all to remember this document number for me, is 1 lots of zeros 4 5 3. This is called audience participation. Yeah, I want you guys to remember this number for me. On that note, I'm going to go back to this this thing over here. Actually, let's quickly have a look. That is actually going to go to Mark for demo. So if I go and quickly refresh this, I'll see that we just created this thing called demo myApproval on today, and it's gone to Mark for approval. Okay, so what I'm going to do quickly is give it some attachments so I can, and this is the power of the whole thing in terms of any application created in any manner. I can simply browse or put up any attachments that I have, and very quickly go to Cordis demo. I'm going to attach a bank statement and a computer specification and a credit card statement, and I say OK, upload. So now I've created a brand new document, number 1 lots of zeros 43. I send it to my manager. If I look at the history over here, to Mark to approve, let's see if he's got it. So 2 things will happen. Obviously, we know people may not log into the system all the time, or maybe they will. But if I now do refresh on this, you'll find the number 25 goes up to 26. You'll find over here the document that we just created. If I go back down, here it is. Please approve park document number 1 lots of zeros 453. I made some attachments, and here they are. I double click on those items and I can see it. So here it is, open the item. And here, as Joe mentioned before, It is now a mobile decision support system. It's not simply approvals. I'm making decisions to either approve, reject, suspend, reserve this item on all the facts that I've got in front of me. I know it was created by Edward and it's gone to me and it's time logged, so I've got full visibility of who's doing what. So from a compliance perspective, if I did say, you know what, this is good, but it's above my pay grade, I can then reassign it to somebody else by using the button forward to somebody else. And it will monitor that, say, look, Edward said he's okay with it, but he just sent it to Mary for ratification. And I've got a full audit trail. So if anybody wants to look at any time, where is this item? It's fully visible. It's fully traceable. The person who created it, Edward, can see from the root application that he sent that this is where it's gone. Yeah. So that's the beauty about this application. It is very simple, yet very effective. If I look at, say, Ariba requisitions, here you can see is now pulling over. Let's quickly go into the Ariba requisition. Is pulling over from Ariba in the cloud the information that is got for this requisition. And here it is. In this case, it's just one line with nothing on it. Okay. But
yeah, Ramesh, can I just pinch in there quickly? You touched there on compliance and a paper trail. I know some of our audience will be thinking, oh yeah, that's great because we can track who did what and point the finger maybe when it goes wrong or whatever, really, whatever your reasons. But one thing that has become apparent is that legislatures over the world are gradually catching up with data compliance. There's some new European legislation at the moment called EDRP, for instance, which can allow the EU to levy absolutely enormous fines on businesses who, for want of a better term, really, mislay or mistreat their data. And so this idea of compliance is actually becoming incredibly important, not just in organizations, for instance, I touched on healthcare earlier on, but not just in organizations like that where lives are at stake, but in any organization that uses data, it's becoming incredibly important that there is this virtual paper trail. Sorry, Ramesh, to interrupt. But
no, that's fine. And you're totally right, because again, I think the key thing again is this functionality in terms of full visibility, the ability to, if they put any comments against it, you want to be able to see that. Who created it, when they created it, any attachments that they've done, as we saw right now. So let's finish off that example. We created this item, and again, I can approve it over here, or I can approve it in the web, in my Outlook. Let's actually approve this in the Outlook. Let's go over here and quickly get data, because I know I've just created a new one, and the last time I did this, I need to refresh it. And here it is. It's now appeared over here. I double click on this item. I see this is my line journals. I made 3 attachments. There they are. I can see the workflow history of it when it was created. And let's approve it. Okay, to post. And approve. So suddenly, as soon as by doing that, it's gone out of my inbox. And again, if I were to go, so you saw this go down by one. And again, if I do the same with the web application, if I refresh this, because I haven't refreshed it, I just flicked over to the screen, you're going to see that go down by 1. Because at the same, this is the key thing. A lot of approval systems are pulling data and then storing it in a black box and then serving it out to you. That means they're only as good as the last time they pull the data. Here, we're not holding anything in a black box. Here, we're doing real time, because technology allows us to do it. Technology is available, bandwidth's available, so therefore we're pulling in data as we need it, so it's real-time information. And that's the difference about some of the other approval systems which are out there and what we have to offer in the market. The other thing, again, I'll briefly touch on, is if I look at approval systems, we also need to be able to build into the system that occasionally I'm not going to be here, I'm on holiday. So then what the person can do, they can go in and do some substitutions. So look, for all the documents which are of a, say, purchasing nature or an HR nature or whatever, then send it to, let's choose somebody, send it to, in this case, Mary, okay? And so Mary will be covering and looking after all my items for HR, and from whatever dates I give. So again, the idea is to make approvals and subsequent sort of management of approvals, if I'm not going to be here, very easy to use and scalable. And what's, as I said, what is the art of the possible basically. So here you can see it on a web front end with all different types of items which are coming through, whether it's purchase order approvals or quantity blocks. Again, let's have a look at one of these things. Here, one of the things that Joe mentioned before, traditional approval systems sometimes only wanted you to give a comment. Well, here's such item. In this case, this has come from an AP system that says, look, we think this invoice is a duplicate. Somebody needs to just validate it that it's okay to pay. And I could put in here, yes, it's okay, fine, I validate it, and I send it back to the accounts payable department to carry on. So here you're using the system as a mere postman, yeah, to make sure that the process, the business process, isn't getting stuck. The other applications over here, the other items which we had, if I look at, say, quantity block discrepancy, here I can say, I'm actually giving you authority to overcome the block and pay the invoice as it's coming, even though it's not right. I take full responsibility by saying pay as invoiced. So here you're looking at delegation of authority limits, and we're making sure people are playing within those rules, and the technology is supporting consumption of those delegation of authority limits wherever this person is. And on that note, Juliana's just given me a little prod that I've overstepped my timings. So I'm going to go back to the slides. So the next thing, briefly have a quick chat about is, Joe, some of the things that we talked about in terms of the art of the possible, in terms of web front ends, in terms of the outlook, what do you see, in which direction do you see the market going, and where do you think people see their most value is going to come from?
Well, thanks, Ramesh. Yeah, it's an interesting one because people are getting more picky. People are getting more difficult to please with their technology. In that, probably not so long ago, maybe even 7 or 8 years ago, certainly 10 or 15, the fact that people were empowered with technology was enough to make them want to use it. It was new, it was exciting, it was quite glamorous, I guess, in some ways. You know, we've got this application that does X, Y, and Z. You know, we can track workflows through the business. As a supervisor, I can grant approval, or I can okay these expenses, and so on and so forth. And really, that was enough for people. These days, what becomes absolutely apparent is that unless these systems are in place that make people want to use the technology and make it easy, they won't want to use it. And what I've seen quite a lot, which is tragic in many ways, is that I've seen 6 and indeed 7-figure IT systems, in particular software, placed into large businesses, and that just simply within a year or 2 years just isn't used at all. And the reason why it isn't used, there are all sorts of reasons why it isn't used, but there are a couple of very common reasons, but it comes down to the same thing. The first reason is that the installation and the planning didn't take long enough and the right people weren't consulted. That's a fairly obvious one, really. But the second one is something I just touched on there, is that if it's not easy to use, if it's not a vocabulary with which people are familiar, they probably won't take the time to learn new vocabulary unless, you know, it can be taught in half an hour. And in fact, the best software in particular I've seen falls into 2 camps. First of all, it works in a very simple way that an idiot could pick up. And in that camp, I put Apple's iOS. In the second camp is software that is simple to use because it works along the same kind of lines that we use every day in our everyday lives. And if you look at the software that is ubiquitous, we've got the Office suite, we've got web browsers, and we've got chat apps. Really, those are, you know, there are also things like outside of enterprise and business. We've also got things like shopping apps and bits and pieces like that. But those three really, the chat apps, web browsers, and office apps are the ones that everyone uses, and successful software falls into usually one of those camps.
Okay, thank you very much. We've actually got one question which we have not answered during the course of the demonstration, and that is basically, it's a question about landscape and technology. So the question is basically, what sort of landscape do we need to actually have this application working? And I'm going to quickly go through that very quickly. This application, which we just showed, myApproval, is a very simple application in the sense that it sits on the SAP Cloud Platform or a NetWeaver Gateway on premise, and here it does all the consolidation, and then it serves it over to exactly what Joe mentioned about people. If they're familiar with Office, it serves it to them in Office. If they're familiar with a web browser, it serves it to a web browser. And in the meantime, on the back end, what it's doing is pulling the data from either SAP, or as we just did right now with Ariba, or other non-SAP systems. So that in a nutshell is the landscape for this application. On that note, we'll wait for a few more seconds. If we have any more questions, we'll take them. If not, we'll thank you very much for your attendance.
Yeah, thanks, Ramesh. That was very interesting, very informative. One question which I'm asked a great deal, or have been asked a great deal when I've been involved in, for instance, bespoke software installations, is, can it do this? Can it do that? Will it do this? And once your software installation causes your users to start asking those questions, you know you're onto a winner. You know you're going to get return on investment, because it's actually inspired, it's probably too strong a word, but it's enthused staff to such an extent that they accept it. It's great. You know you're going to get return on investment, and then they start asking those questions. And then as soon as they start saying, can it do this? Can it do that? It'd be great if it could do this. Wouldn't it be fantastic if it could do that? Then you know that you've got a great piece of software on your hands, or a great technical installation of some description or another.
In that case, we'll look forward to people asking us those questions, Joe. And on that note, we'd like to thank the audience for participating, and thank Joe for his wise words in sharing the knowledge of all the things that he's collected over his years, and telling us a bit about the market and the way it's going, and the benefits people, and how they're using technology to exploit and make benefits for themselves and give themselves a competitive advantage. On that note, Juliana, is there anything else you want to add?
No.
In that case, thank you, everybody. And
thank you, everyone.
Thank you again. And if you need any more information, as I said, please do not hesitate to reach out to any of those items.